Everyone in the Moonspire court believed Lyra Veil was too weak to touch royal blood, too wolfless to stand among warriors, too lowborn to matter beneath the silver banners of the Alpha King. But on the night the storm split the mountains open, she stood in the courtyard with a dying wolf cub pressed against her chest, his small body glowing beneath her torn hands, while 50 armed soldiers surrounded her with spears raised. And when the Alpha King arrived, cloaked in black fur and rage, expecting to see a thief, a traitor, or a witch, he instead saw the impossible. His cursed son breathing again because the abandoned Omega everyone had mocked was bleeding light into his veins. Lyra had been born beneath a moon that did not shine. In the villages beyond the royal forest, that was considered an omen, and among werewolves, omens followed a child longer than hunger, longer than grief, longer even than blood. Her mother had died before naming the father who left her behind, and the pack that took Lyra in treated her not as kin, but as a mistake the gods had forgotten to erase. She grew thin in the kitchens of Blackthorn Keep, carrying water, mending cloaks, washing blood from training stones after warriors finished their drills. The others shifted when they reached 16, bones breaking into strength, eyes burning gold, wolves rising from within like royal fire. Lyra waited. Nothing came. No howl beneath her ribs, no claws beneath her skin, no answering shadow in the mirror. Only silence. And in a kingdom ruled by wolves, silence was shame. They called her Hollow Girl. Moonless, half-made, a body without a beast. When noble daughters passed her in the corridors, they lifted their skirts as though weakness might stain silk. When young warriors saw her carrying baskets, they snapped their teeth and laughed, asking whether she feared the moon or whether the moon feared wasting light on her. Lyra never answered. She had learned that pain fed cruel people, and silence starved them. Yet silence did not save her from Lady Seraphine, the golden-haired noblewoman promised by the council to the Alpha King. Seraphine wore beauty like a blade and kindness like a mask. She smiled before witnesses, then spilled wine over Lyra's hands and whispered, "Careful, little Omega. Even servants must know their place before queens." The public humiliation came during the winter hunt, when every pack under the crown gathered at Moonspire Castle to honor Alpha King Kyle Draven, the feared ruler, whose wolf was said to be larger than any beast born in 3 centuries. Lyra had been ordered to carry the ceremonial goblet across the Great Hall, past nobles, warriors, rival alphas, and the royal council seated beneath banners stitched with silver moons. She kept her gaze low, but Seraphine's foot moved like a serpent beneath the table. Lyra stumbled. The goblet crashed. Dark wine spilled across the marble floor and splashed onto the hem of Seraphine's white gown. The hall froze. Then laughter rose, sharp and hungry. Seraphine stood slowly, her eyes glittering with triumph. "This is what happens when we let wolfless scraps serve among bloodlines," she said, loud enough for every noble to hear. "She cannot even carry a cup. How could she ever carry the honor of a pack?" Lyra knelt at once, cheeks burning, hands trembling against broken crystal. A shard sliced her palm, but she did not cry out. Blood welled bright red against the white stone. For one strange moment, the torches nearest her flickered blue. No one noticed except the old royal seer, who lifted her blind eyes toward Lyra, as if hearing a voice from beneath the earth. Then the doors opened, and Alpha King Kale entered. The laughter died, as if cut by a blade. He was not merely a king who ruled by crown, he ruled by presence. Broad, shouldered, dark-haired, his face carved with cold command, Kyle carried the silence of battlefields and the weight of graves. The scar across his jaw only made him seem more dangerous. At his side walked Commander Varric, his most trusted soldier, and behind them moved royal guards bearing black spears. Kale's gaze fell on the broken goblet, then on Seraphine's stained gown, then on Lyra kneeling in blood and glass. For one heartbeat, his eyes narrowed, not with pity, but with something deeper and harder to name. Lyra felt it like a hand closing around her throat. Then Seraphine bowed her head and said, "Forgive the disturbance, my king." The servant girl forgot herself. The council murmured approval. Lyra waited for punishment. Kale looked down at her, and his voice was low enough to chill the marble. "Then teach her to remember." The words struck harder than any slap. Seraphine smiled. The hall exhaled. Lyra lowered her head so no one would see her eyes fill with tears. And far below the castle, in a sealed chamber where no servant was permitted to go, something small and cursed opened its eyes. That night, Lyra was sent beyond the inner wall to gather frostroot from the edge of the royal forest, a task normally given to trained hunters because the woods around Moonspire were not merely dark, they were old. Ancient magic slept beneath the roots, and things exiled from the moon sometimes wandered there. Snow fell in thin silver lines. Lyra wrapped her torn cloak tighter and carried a lantern that barely held against the wind. Her palms still ached from the crystal cut, though the wound had closed strangely fast. She tried not to think about Kale's words. Teach her to remember. He had not known her. He had not seen the years of mockery, the stolen meals, the nights she slept in storage rooms beside sacks of grain. To him, she had been nothing but a servant at his feet. Yet the memory of his eyes would not leave her. They had been cold, yes, but not empty. Something had moved behind them when he saw her blood. A cry broke through the storm. Small, broken, almost swallowed by wind. Lyra stopped. Wolves cried in many ways, and servants learned to fear all of them, but this sound was not a hunter's call or a beast's warning. It was pain. She should have run back to the keep. She should have remembered that weak girls survived by avoiding trouble. Instead, she stepped between the trees. The cry came again, thinner this time. Beneath a fallen pine, half buried in snow, lay a wolf cub no larger than a newborn deer. His fur was silver white, but dark veins of shadow moved beneath it like living ink. An iron trap had closed around his hind leg, and black blood stained the snow. Not red, black. Lyra's breath caught. No ordinary wolf bled like that. The cub saw her and tried to snarl, but the sound collapsed into a whimper. His eyes were not animal eyes. They were blue, impossibly bright, filled with terror and intelligence. Lyra knelt slowly. "I will not hurt you," she whispered, though she did not know whether he understood. The trap was marked with runes, royal runes, forbidden runes. Her fingers shook as she worked at the hinge, but the iron burned her skin. The cub convulsed. Shadows crawled higher, beneath his fur. Somewhere in the distance, horns sounded from the castle, long and urgent. Soldiers were searching. For him. Lyra did not know why, but she knew what would happen if they found him dying in a cursed trap. They would either blame her, kill him, or both. She pulled harder. The trap opened enough for the cub to drag free, but his body went limp in her arms. His breath faded. Panic rose inside her. "No," she said, pressing her hand over the wound. "No, no, stay with me." Blood from her reopened palm mixed with his black blood. The moment it touched him, the forest changed. Snow stopped falling. The trees bent inward as if listening. A pale glow spread from Lyra's hand into the cub's torn flesh. Pain tore through her own body. So fierce she nearly screamed. She felt his wound as though it were hers, felt iron in bone, poison in blood, a curse wrapped around his heart like a thorned chain. Something inside her answered it. Not a wolf, not claws, something older. Her blood turned warm, then hot, then radiant. The cub gasped. Lyra stared as the wound closed beneath her fingers. The black veins retreated. The cub's chest rose sharply. He opened his eyes and made a soft sound, pressing his muzzle into her wrist. The glow faded, leaving Lyra weak and trembling. In the distance, men shouted. Torches moved between the trees. "There," a soldier cried. "By the old pines." Lyra clutched the cub to her chest and ran. She did not know where she was running. only that every instinct in her body screamed not to let them take him. Branches tore her cloak. Snow filled her shoes. The cub remained silent against her, too weak to struggle. Behind her, hounds barked, but then suddenly whimpered and stopped. A strange hush rolled through the forest. Lyra looked back once and saw the shadows between trees moving against the wind. Not soldiers. Something else. Something drawn by the magic she had awakened. She stumbled into a ravine and slid down the icy slope, landing hard near a frozen stream. Pain exploded in her ankle. She tried to stand and fell. Above, torchlight gathered. Commander Varric's voice cut through the storm. Bring the girl alive. If the cub is breathing, take it from her. The cub. Not a cub. It. Lyra's arms tightened. I am sorry, she whispered to him. I do not know what you are, but I will not hand you to them. Then the stream cracked. Beneath the ice, light pulsed in response to her words. The soldiers descended. Lyra dragged herself backward, but there was nowhere to go. Varric stepped from the snow, tall and iron-eyed, his black armor marked with the king's sigil. His gaze dropped to the cub, and something like fear passed over his face before hardening into command. You have stolen royal property, he said. Give it to me. Lyra shook her head. Varric drew his sword. Do not make a grave of your loyalty, Omega. The air changed before he could move. Every soldier turned. A black wolf emerged from the storm. Enormous, silent, eyes burning silver. The men lowered their heads at once. Lyra's heart stopped. Even she knew that beast. Every child in the kingdom knew the shape of the Alpha King's wolf, though most only saw it carved into temple doors or painted on war banners. The black wolf shifted as he walked, fur folding into shadow, shadow into flesh, until Kyle Draven stood between the trees in a cloak dusted with snow. His gaze found the cub in Lyra's arms. For the first time since she had seen him, the Alpha King looked afraid. What did you do? He asked. Lyra tried to answer, but her voice failed. Varric stepped forward quickly. My king, she was found with the prince beyond the boundary. The trap was sprung. There is blood on her hands. Prince. The word struck Lyra like thunder. The cub stirred weakly against her chest. Kale's eyes flashed. Give him to me, he said. It was not request. It was command, heavy with alpha power. Every soldier bowed under it. Lyra felt the force press against her bones, urging obedience. But the cub whimpered and buried his face against her torn cloak. Kyle saw it. So did Varric. So did the soldiers. A dying royal heir, clinging to a wolfless Omega instead of his own father. Lyra should have surrendered him. Instead, she whispered, he is still cursed. The words came from somewhere she did not recognize. Kale went utterly still. What did you say? Lyra swallowed. There is something around his heart, like thorns. I felt it when my blood touched him. Varric's expression sharpened. Witchcraft. Several soldiers raised their spears. Kale lifted one hand, and they froze. He walked toward Lyra slowly, each step careful, as though approaching both a miracle and a blade. No healer in the realm can feel the curse, he said. No priest, no seer, no blood mage. His voice lowered. How can you? I do not know, Lyra said. I only wanted him to live. Kale crouched before her. Up close, he looked less like the distant ruler of moonlit banners, and more like a man carved open by grief and forced to hide the wound. His eyes moved over her face, her bleeding palm, the cub's steady breathing. His name is Rowan, he said, so softly that only she heard. He has not breathed without pain since the night he was born. The cub's ears twitched at the name. Lyra looked down, and her chest tightened. Who cursed him? Kael's jaw hardened. Someone who wanted the throne to die with me. Before Lyra could speak, the trees behind them erupted with movement. Dark shapes dropped from the branches, men in gray wolf pelts, faces masked with bone. Rival pack assassins, Varric shouted. Steel rang. The first arrow flew toward Kael's back. Lyra saw it before anyone else, a streak of black through the snow. She moved without thinking, throwing herself forward with Rowan in her arms. The arrow grazed her shoulder instead of Kael's spine. Pain flared. Kael roared, and the forest answered with terror. The battle was swift and brutal. Kael shifted halfway, claws tearing through armor, eyes silver with rage. Soldiers clashed against assassins between the trees. Lyra crawled behind a stone, clutching Rowan as blood soaked her sleeve. The cub trembled. The curse beneath his fur flickered again, reacting to violence, feeding on fear. His breathing faltered. "Stay with me," Lyra pleaded. She pressed her wounded palm against his chest. Light sparked. This time the pain was worse. She saw fragments that were not hers. A cradle beneath a blood moon, a woman's scream, a council chamber filled with masked faces, a blade dripping black venom, Kael holding a newborn cub while priests whispered that the prince would not survive the year. Then, one face surfaced clearer than the rest. Commander Varric, younger, standing beside a hooded figure as runes were carved into silver chains. Lyra gasped and pulled away. Across the ravine, Varric turned as if he had felt her see him. The last assassin fell beneath Kael's claws. Silence returned in pieces. Snow began again. Kael rushed to Lyra and Rowan, his expression locked between fury and fear. "You are wounded." "It was not the assassins," Lyra whispered, staring at Varric. "The curse. I saw who helped bind it." Varric's hand moved toward his sword. Kael followed her gaze. For one dangerous heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Varric bowed. "My king, the Omega is bleeding and frightened. Forbidden magic twists memory. We must return before the prince weakens again." His voice was steady, loyal, perfect, but Lyra had seen the truth behind his eyes. Kael looked at Lyra. She expected doubt. Of course he would doubt her. She was a servant, a wolfless girl with blood on her hands, accusing the king's most trusted commander. But Kael's gaze did not dismiss her. It studied her as though she had become the center of a war he had not known he was losing. "We return to the castle," he said. "The girl comes with me." Varric's face did not change, but his eyes darkened. "To the cells?" "To the royal wing," Kael replied. Every soldier stared. Seraphine would hear by dawn. The council would hear sooner, and Lyra, who had never slept beneath anything finer than a kitchen blanket, was carried through the castle gates under the Alpha King's cloak, holding his cursed heir against her heart. By morning, Moonspire Court had turned her into a rumor. Some said she had stolen the prince. Some said she had seduced the king with blood magic. Some said she had killed a wolf and disguised it as a miracle. Lyra heard whispers through the walls of the chamber where she had been placed under guard. Not imprisoned exactly, but not free. Rowan slept on a fur blanket near the hearth, still in cub form, though Kael had told her he had been born a child and forced by the curse into the shape of a wolf. The truth made her ache. A prince trapped in a beast's body, a father trapped in fear, a kingdom circling them like vultures. Kael came at dusk. He entered without ceremony, but the guards outside stiffened, as if lightning had passed through them. Lyra stood too quickly and nearly fell from weakness. He crossed the room and caught her by the elbow. His touch was firm, warm, and careful. The contact startled them both. For a moment, the air between them tightened. Rowan lifted his head and gave a small huff, almost approving. Kael released her slowly. "You should be resting. Servants are not taught to rest." Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps. Or shame. "You are not in the servants' quarters now." Lyra looked at him then. Really looked. "Why?" Kael's answer did not come at once. He walked to Rowan and knelt, laying one hand on the cub's head. The prince stirred, but did not wake. "Because my son chooses you when his pain returns. Because your blood did what my crown, my armies, and every sacred healer failed to do. Because last night you accused Varric, and this morning I found 3 royal trap runes missing from the armory records. Lyra's breath caught. You believe me? I believe someone wants me to think you are the danger. His eyes met hers. That is rarely where the true danger stands. The days that followed became a strange and fragile captivity. Lyra was watched by guards, questioned by healers, observed by the old blind seer who kept smiling as though she had been waiting for Lyra since before Lyra was born. Rowan refused to leave her side. When pain seized him, only her touch calmed him. Each healing left Lyra weaker, but each time she saw more fragments. A silver cradle, a hidden dagger, a council seal pressed into black wax, a woman singing in a language Lyra somehow understood, though she had never learned it. Chaol began to visit more often. At first, he came for Rowan, then he stayed after the prince slept. He asked Lyra about the village that raised her, about the years before Moonspire, about the mother she barely remembered. No king had ever asked Lyra anything, unless it was an order shaped like a question. Their closeness did not soften him before others. In the council hall, Chaol remained ice and iron. But in the quiet chamber, when Rowan dreamed and the fire burned low, his guarded mask cracked in small ways. He told her the queen had died giving birth, that the court blamed weakness in her bloodline, that the council had urged him to remarry quickly so the throne would have another heir. Seraphine had been their chosen bride. And yours? Lyra asked before she could stop herself. Chaol looked into the fire. I stopped trusting what I wanted the night my son was cursed. The answer should not have hurt her. It did. Seraphine came on the 7th day. She swept into Lyra's chamber in a gown of pale gold, flanked by 2 ladies, and wearing a smile sharp enough to cut silk. How touching, she said, watching Rowan sleep with his head on Lyra's lap. The little servant has been given a prince to nurse. I wonder what she gave the king in return. Lyra stiffened. Leave, Seraphine laughed softly. You forget yourself again. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do you think he sees you? You are a tool, little Omega, a wound that bleeds when pressed. Once the prince is restored, you will be buried somewhere quiet, and the king will take a proper queen. Lyra's hand curled protectively over Rowan. Seraphine's gaze dropped to the gesture, and hatred flashed through her beauty. Do not touch what belongs above you. Rowan woke with a growl too deep for his small body. The candles blew out. For one instant, his shadow on the wall was not a cub's shadow, but the outline of a young boy wearing a crown of thorns. Seraphine stumbled back, fear breaking her composure. Lyra saw it. Not surprise. Recognition. You know what was done to him, Lyra whispered. Seraphine's face hardened. Careful. Then she turned and left. That night, Rowan's fever returned stronger than ever. Chaol found Lyra on the floor beside the hearth, bleeding from both palms, light pouring into Rowan while the cub convulsed in her arms. Stop, he commanded, kneeling beside her. You will kill yourself. If I stop, he dies. Lyra. It was the first time he said her name without title or distance, and the sound nearly broke her. She looked up through tears. He is only a child. Chaol's face twisted. For a moment, the feared Alpha King was gone, and only a father remained. He placed his hand over hers, as though he could share the cost. The moment their blood touched, the room exploded with silver light. Lyra saw everything. Not fragments now, but memory whole and terrible. The night Rowan was born, the royal council gathered not to bless him, but to bind him. Varric held the guards away. Seraphine stood beside Lord Marius, the oldest counselor, while a hooded witch carved a curse into a silver crown meant for the infant prince. The curse would trap Rowan in wolf form, weaken him slowly, and make Chaol desperate enough to marry Seraphine, whose bloodline the council could control. But something had gone wrong. The curse had recoiled from Rowan's royal blood and searched for a counterblood, an ancient healing line thought extinct. Lyra saw a woman fleeing through the snow with a newborn child in her arms. Her mother, She saw the woman leaving the baby at Blackthorn's border, whispering through tears, "Forgive me, little star. If they find your blood, they will use it to raise kings or kill them." The vision shattered. Lyra fell back, gasping. Kael caught her. Rowan's fever broke. The cub's body glowed, then shifted in a ripple of light. Fur receded. Small limbs unfolded. A boy of perhaps 5 years lay asleep beneath the blanket, silver hair damp against his brow, his breathing steady for the first time. Kael went still. The sound he made was not a word. It was grief, relief, and disbelief, breaking through armor all at once. He gathered his son into his arms and bowed his head over him. Lyra turned away, trembling, not wanting to intrude on the sacredness of that moment. But Kael reached for her hand. "You brought him back," he said. "Not fully," Lyra whispered. "The curse root remains. Then we tear it out. The council will never allow it." His eyes lifted, cold again. But this time the cold was not aimed at her. "Then the council will learn what remains of a throne when its wolves betray their king." The betrayal came faster than either expected. At dawn, temple bells rang an alarm. Guards stormed the royal wing. Varric entered with 20 men and a decree bearing the council's seal. Seraphine stood behind him, veiled in white like a grieving bride. "By authority of the royal council," Varric declared, "the servant Lyra Veil is accused of blood witchcraft, attempted theft of the heir, and enchantment of the Alpha King. She will be brought before the court for judgment." Kael stepped between them and Lyra. "You have forgotten who rules this kingdom." Lord Marius entered then, leaning on a silver cane, his smile dry as bone. "No, my king. We remember too well. That is why we must protect the throne from whatever spell this girl has wrapped around your grief." Kyle's power filled the corridor. Several guards whimpered, but then Varric raised a silver chain etched with curse runes, and Kyle staggered. Lyra realized with horror that the chain had been made from the same magic binding Rowan. It did not weaken a wolf. It weakened royal blood. Varric had prepared for this. Seraphine's eyes gleamed. "Take her," she said. Lyra did not fight, not because she was afraid, though fear beat wildly inside her, but because Rowan stood behind Kael in human form, small and pale, and every spear in the corridor seemed ready to turn toward him if she resisted. She let them bind her wrists. Kyle tried to reach her, but the chain around his arm burned silver. "Lyra," he growled. She looked back once. In his eyes, she saw fury, promise, and something dangerously close to love. Then Varric dragged her away. The trial was held in the great hall, where she had once spilled wine and knelt in broken glass. This time, every noble in the kingdom watched from the balconies. Seraphine stood beside the council in white, playing the wronged future queen. Lord Marius accused Lyra of forbidden blood magic. Varric testified that he had found her with the prince beyond the boundary. Servants whispered. Warriors spat, and Lyra, chained beneath the silver banners, felt the old shame rising like water around her throat. Hollow girl, moonless, half-made. Only now they feared what they had once mocked. "Show us your wolf," Marius demanded. "If you are no witch, shift before the court." Cruel laughter stirred. They knew she could not. Lyra lifted her chin. "I have no wolf." "Then you admit you are unnatural." "No," she said, voice shaking but clear. "I admit I survived among people who only value one kind of power." The hall quieted. Seraphine's face tightened. Marius struck his cane against the marble. "Blade her." A guard cut Lyra's palm before Kael could stop him from the far end of the hall, where he stood restrained by royal silver and surrounded by loyalists too few to overcome the council's trap. Blood fell onto the marble. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Rowan cried out from beside his father. The wound in Lyra's palm opened wider, not by blade, but by light. Silver radiance spilled across the floor, racing through the cracks in the stone. The old seer rose from her seat, blind eyes shining. "Starblood," she whispered. "The lost healing line." The hall erupted. Marius shouted for silence. Seraphine stepped backward. Varric drew his sword, but the light had reached the ancient wolf sigil carved into the center of the floor. The sigil awakened. Moonfire climbed the pillars. Every banner snapped, though there was no wind. Lyra's chains melted from her wrists. Above her head, a crown-shaped constellation appeared in light. Not the crown of conquest, but the crown of restoration. The mark of the bloodline that once healed kings and broke curses before jealous courts hunted them into extinction. Kael tore free of the silver chain with a roar that shook dust from the rafters. He crossed the hall like a storm. Varric lunged toward Lyra, but Rowan moved first. The small prince stepped between them, eyes blazing blue, and shifted not into the fragile cub, but into a young silver wolf wreathed in moonlight. The court gasped. Varric froze. Lyra raised her bleeding hand. She did not know the words that came from her mouth, but the magic did. What was bound in cruelty, be named. What was hidden in blood, be seen. The curse tore open. Black thorns erupted from Rowan's shadow, twisting toward the ceiling, and within them appeared the memories of the crime for all to witness. Seraphine beside the cradle, Marius giving the order, Varric standing guard, the witch carving the curse into royal silver. The entire court saw it. Every lie, every betrayal, every carefully staged year of grief. Seraphine screamed that it was illusion. Marius tried to flee. Varric raised his sword toward Rowan, and that was the last mistake he made. Kael shifted mid-stride. The black wolf crashed into Varric with the force of a collapsing gate. Steel flew. Men scattered. Lyra shielded Rowan as the court descended into chaos. Rival nobles shouted. Guards turned on guards. The old alliances broke like rotten rope. Seraphine seized a dagger and lunged not at Kael, not at Rowan, but at Lyra. "You were nothing," she hissed. "You should have stayed nothing." Lyra caught her wrist. The dagger hovered inches from her heart. Seraphine was stronger, trained, furious. Lyra was weak from blood loss. For one breath, it seemed the old world would win. Then Rowan pressed his muzzle against Lyra's leg, and Kael's voice thundered through the hall. "Touch her, and there will be no mercy left in this kingdom." Lyra looked at Seraphine and saw not beauty, not power, but terror wearing jewels. The healing blood inside Lyra flared, not to mend flesh this time, but to reveal truth. Seraphine's reflection appeared in the polished marble beneath them, not as a noble bride, but as a woman crowned with stolen bones, her hands blackened by the curse she had helped create. The court recoiled. Seraphine dropped the dagger. Lyra released her, and royal guards seized her at last. When the chaos ended, Lord Marius lay bound beneath the very council seat from which he had condemned so many others. Varric was dragged away in chains of ordinary iron, stripped of command and honor. Seraphine's white gown was stained with soot and silver bloodlight. The nobles who had laughed at Lyra now lowered their eyes as she stood in the center of the hall, barefoot, bleeding, and brighter than any crown around her. The reversal was so complete that it felt unreal. The wolfless servant had not shifted into a beast. She had awakened into something the wolves had forgotten to respect. Kael approached her in human form, carrying Rowan wrapped in his cloak. The prince had shifted back into a boy, exhausted but alive, his small hand curled around his father's collar. The entire court watched. Lyra expected Kael to thank her quietly, perhaps command healers to tend her, perhaps return to the distance kings required. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee before her. A sound passed through the hall like wind before lightning. The Alpha King bowed his head to the abandoned Omega. "You saved my son," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You revealed treason in my house. You carry the blood of a line my ancestors failed to protect." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I wronged you when I let this court shame you. I wronged you when I saw only what others named you. If you ask justice, I will give it. If you ask freedom, I will grant it. If you ask a place beside my throne, I will defend it until my last breath." Lyra could barely breathe, and if I ask nothing, his gaze softened in a way that made the hall disappear. "Then I will still spend my life becoming worthy of what you gave without being asked." The mate bond awakened then, not as a violent claim, not as conquest, but as recognition. A silver thread of light unfolded between them, from her wounded palm to the scar over his heart. Kale inhaled sharply. Lyra felt his grief, his loneliness, his fierce love for Rowan, his fear of wanting something for himself after years of loss. He felt her hunger to be seen, the old wounds of mockery, the stubborn tenderness that had made her run into a cursed forest for a dying child no one had told her was royal. The bond did not command. It asked. Rowan opened sleepy eyes and looked between them. "Does this mean she stays?" His small voice broke what remained of the court's silence. Lyra laughed through tears. Kale looked at her, waiting, not as a king demanding an answer, but as a man offering one. The choice belonged to her. For the first time in her life, power did not stand over her. It stood beside her. Lyra looked around the hall at every face that had once dismissed her. Then she looked at Rowan, alive because her blood had answered his pain. Finally, she looked at Kale. "I will not be hidden," she said. "I will not be used. I will not be your court's quiet miracle." Kale bowed his head. "Never. And your son will never again be treated as a curse." His voice deepened. "On my life." She stepped closer and placed her hand over his. "Then I will stay. Not because I was chosen by a king." Her eyes lifted to the court. "Because I choose what this kingdom becomes next." The days after the trial became the beginning of a different legend. The corrupt council was broken and rebuilt. The old seer opened sealed archives and found records of the Starblood healers, protectors of royal children, breakers of cursed bonds, once betrayed by kings afraid of needing them. Lyra learned her mother had been the last guardian of that line, hunted not because she was weak, but because her blood could undo the darkest bargains of powerful men. Rowan grew stronger each dawn. Sometimes he remained a boy, solemn and bright-eyed. Sometimes he shifted into a silver cub and slept beside Lyra's chair while she studied ancient healing rites. The kingdom, which had called her hollow, began leaving offerings of moonflowers at her door. Kale did not rush her. That was perhaps what undid her most. He did not claim her before she was ready, or use the bond to pull her closer. He walked with her through the winter gardens, asked before touching her hand, listened when she spoke of the servant corridors and the names of those still mistreated below stairs. He changed laws that had stood for centuries, not as gifts to win her favor, but as debts finally paid. And slowly, Lyra discovered that the feared Alpha King was most dangerous, not in anger, but in devotion. When he loved, he did not soften into weakness. He became a fortress. On the night of the first full moon after Rowan's curse was broken, the entire kingdom gathered beneath Moonspire's open sky. Snow shone like powdered silver across the courtyard, where Lyra had once stood surrounded by spears. Now she stood beside Kale, wearing no crown yet, only a dark cloak clasped with a silver wolf. Rowan held her hand on one side and his father's on the other. Above them, the moon rose whole and bright. For years, Lyra had believed the moon had refused her, but as its light touched her face, she understood the truth. It had not abandoned her. It had hidden her until the world was desperate enough to need the kind of power it had mocked. Kyle turned to her before the gathered packs. "Lyra Veil," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Starblood of the lost line, protector of the air, breaker of curses, and my true mate. Will you stand with me?" The old Lyra might have trembled beneath so many eyes. This Lyra remembered the dying cub in the snow, the blood on marble, the king on his knees, and the moment she chose herself. She looked at Kale, at Rowan, at the wolves waiting beneath the moon, and answered, "I will stand, but never behind you." A smile touched Kale's mouth, rare and devastating. "Then beside me." he said. And when the Pax bowed, they did not bow to a servant rescued by a king. They bowed to the girl who had rescued the king's heart, his son, and the future of a kingdom that had mistaken silence for emptiness. Lyra had entered Moonspire as a wolfless omega with nothing but torn hands and a stubborn soul. She remained as the woman whose blood could call life back from the edge of death, whose mercy had exposed betrayal, whose courage had made an alpha king kneel not in defeat, but in love. Then, beside me, he said, and for one fragile breath, Lyra almost believed the worst of the darkness had passed. The courtyard beneath Moonspire Castle seemed to hold its own heartbeat as the gathered Pax lowered themselves before her, warriors and nobles alike, bending beneath the same moon that had watched them laugh at her only weeks before. Snow rested on black armor, silver banners rippled above the towers, and Rowan stood between her and Kael, with his small fingers wrapped around her hand as though she were not merely his healer, but an anchor keeping him in the world. Yet even as the kingdom bowed, Lyra felt something cold move beneath the beauty of that moment. It was not doubt. It was not fear. It was the faint pulse of the curse still buried somewhere deep in Rowan's blood, too quiet for the court to notice, but not quiet enough to escape the blood that had saved him. That night should have been a celebration. The great hall was filled with candlelight, roasted winter meat, dark wine, and songs older than the stone walls themselves. Warriors who had once refused to meet Lyra's eyes now raised cups in her honor. Servants who had once worked beside her watched from the edges with astonishment and secret pride, whispering her name as if it had become a charm. The old seer sat near the hearth, smiling into shadows only she could see. Rowan, pale but laughing for the first time since Lyra had known him, chased a ribbon of moonlight across the floor with 2 young wolf pups from the northern pack, his silver hair falling into his eyes. Kael watched him with an expression so unguarded it made Lyra's chest ache. The Alpha King, feared by armies and obeyed by rival packs, looked like a man learning how to breathe again. But every joy in Moonspire had teeth around it. Lyra knew that now. She felt it when Lord Marius was led through the hall in chains, not toward execution, but toward the lower cells, where the truth of his crimes would be drawn out. He passed close enough for her to see the calm in his face. Not shame, not defeat, calm. His old eyes lifted to hers, and he smiled as though the trial had only been the first move in a game she had not yet understood. Healing blood is still blood, he murmured, so softly that no one but Lyra heard. And all blood can be spilled. Guards shoved him onward before Kael could turn, but the words remained like a blade pressed beneath her ribs. Later, when the feast thinned and the court's laughter softened into murmurs, Lyra slipped from the hall into the moon garden. Frost silvered the hedges, and the statues of ancient queens stood half buried in snow, their stone faces turned toward the sky. She had spent years moving through this castle as a shadow, unseen unless someone needed a task done or a mistake punished. Now every corridor watched her. Every guard bowed. Every noble wondered whether touching her hand might cure their dying ambitions. The change was so sudden it felt less like honor and more like another kind of cage. She pressed her palm against the cold stone of a fountain and closed her eyes. Beneath her skin, the star blood stirred, bright and restless. It was no longer the small, hidden spark that had answered Rowan in the forest. It had awakened, and awakening had made it hungry for purpose. She could feel wounds around her now. The old gardener's aching knee in the servant's yard, a young soldier's cracked rib, a kitchen girl's burned wrist, Rowan's lingering curse like a thorn beneath silk. And deeper still, something vast beneath the castle, something wounded in the land itself. The sensation nearly overwhelmed her. She had not been given power. She had been given every pain within reach. "You left without your cloak," Kael said behind her. Lyra did not turn at once. She knew his footsteps now, not by sound, but by how the air changed around him. The world seemed to straighten when Kael entered it, as if even stone remembered command. He draped a dark fur cloak over her shoulders, his hands lingering only long enough to warm her before he stepped beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The moonlight cut his face into silver and shadow, sharpening the scar along his jaw. "They bowed to me tonight," Lyra said at last. "Yesterday, some of them would have watched me die." Cale's gaze remained on the garden. "Many who bow do not repent. They calculate." "Then why let them stay?" "Because a kingdom cannot be remade in one night without becoming a graveyard." His voice was quiet, but there was iron beneath it. "And because I will not begin your place beside me by drowning the court in blood, unless you ask it of me." Lyra looked at him then. "You would?" Cale's eyes met hers. "For Rowan, yes. For the throne, if I must. For you." He stopped, and that restraint revealed more than any confession could have. His jaw tightened as though he disliked how vulnerable the truth made him. "For you, I am trying to become something more difficult than a weapon." The words sank into her slowly. Cale had spent years protecting his son with walls, threats, punishments, and silence. He did not know how to offer gentleness without fearing it would be used against him. Lyra understood that kind of fear. She had lived a quieter version of it. She had hidden softness beneath obedience because cruel people always searched for soft places to strike. "I do not need you harmless," she said. "I only need to know your strength will not become another chain." Cale bowed his head once. "Then I will spend as long as it takes proving the difference." Before she could answer, Rowan screamed from inside the castle. The sound tore through the garden and through Lyra's blood. Cale moved first, shifting into a blur of black and silver, but Lyra was already running. They reached the royal wing together, guards scattering before them. Rowan's chamber doors had been thrown open. The boy was on the floor beside the hearth, curled in pain, silver veins burning beneath his skin. The old seer knelt near him, one hand outstretched but not touching. "Do not lift him," she warned. "The curse is shedding its skin." Cale dropped beside his son, eyes blazing. It was broken. The seer's blind gaze turned toward Lyra. No, it was revealed. A revealed poison still poisons. Lyra fell to her knees and took Rowan's hand. The moment their skin touched, darkness surged into her like winter water. She gasped. The curse had changed. Before, it had been thorned around his heart. Now it had burrowed deeper, reacting to its exposure, spreading through the old royal line like ink through cloth. It was no longer meant only to kill Rowan. It was meant to awaken, if the truth came out. A second trap hidden beneath the first. She saw flashes. Lord Marius smiling in chains, Seraphine whispering to someone through prison bars, Varric's blood dripping onto a black stone, and beneath the castle a sealed door opening. Rowan clutched her fingers. "Lyra," he whimpered. "There is someone under the floor." The fire went out. Kyle rose slowly, every inch of him lethal. "Get the prince behind me." But the shadow beneath Rowan's body had already begun to stretch. It did not move like normal darkness. It moved like something remembering its shape. The guards at the door drew swords. One by one, every flame in the corridor died. The old seer whispered a prayer in the ancient tongue. Lyra gathered Rowan into her arms, but this time, her blood did not immediately heal him. The magic inside her struck the curse and recoiled. Whatever had awakened beneath Moonspire was older than the spell placed on Rowan, older than the council, perhaps older than the kingdom itself. A voice rose from the dark, thin as smoke and cold as buried iron. "Starblood returns." Cale shifted fully. The black wolf filled the chamber, enormous and snarling, his silver eyes fixed on the crawling shadow. Lyra held Rowan tightly, feeling his small body shake. "What is it?" she asked the seer. The old woman's face had gone pale. "The hollow crown." Kyle's growl deepened. Lyra had heard the phrase only once, in a nursery tale whispered among servants. A cursed relic from the first Wolf Kings, forged when a dying ruler tried to bind death itself to his bloodline. "It was sealed," Kyle said, voice half beast, half man. "By my ancestor." The seer turned her blind eyes toward him. "By Starblood. and now Starblood has returned. The shadow lunged. Lyra did not think. She lifted her bleeding palm and pressed it outward. Light burst from her hand. Not enough to destroy the darkness, but enough to force it back. Pain ripped up her arm. The shadow screamed, and in that scream were voices: children, kings, queens, wolves dying in battle, mothers pleading over cradles. Lyra understood then why her bloodline had been hunted. It did not merely heal wounds. It remembered them. Every wound it touched became part of its power and part of its burden. Kale drove the shadow into the far wall with the force of his wolf, claws tearing through stone where no flesh existed. The seer shouted words of binding. Rowan cried out again, and the shadow snapped back into his chest like a cord pulled tight. The boy collapsed. Lyra caught him before his head struck the floor. The chamber stilled. The flames returned, weak and blue. Kale shifted back to human form, breathing hard, blood running from cuts along his arms where the darkness had touched him. "Tell me how to kill it," he demanded. The seer did not answer immediately. Her silence frightened Lyra more than the attack. At last, the old woman said, "You cannot kill what your crown once made sacred. The hollow crown is tied to the first oath of your line. It feeds on royal blood, but it can only be unbound by the blood that sealed it." Her face turned toward Lyra. "Starblood must enter the lower vault before the next full moon fades." Kael's expression hardened. "No." Lyra looked up. "Kael." "No," he repeated, and this time the word shook the chamber. "The vault beneath Moonspire has not been opened in 200 years. Men sent to guard the outer door went mad from hearing it breathe. I will not send you into a grave, because my ancestors buried their sins poorly." The old seer's voice sharpened. "Then your son will die before dawn 3 nights from now, and the curse will pass into every royal vein that remains." Rowan stirred weakly in Lyra's arms. "Father," he whispered, "I do not want to go back into the dark." Kale's face broke. Not fully, not before the guards, but enough that Lyra saw the wound beneath the king. He knelt and touched Rowan's hair with shaking fingers. Lyra had saved the prince once by instinct. Now saving him would require choice, a choice no one had the right to demand. Yet everyone's eyes had already begun to ask. She looked at Kale. "I will go." His gaze snapped to hers. "You do not know what you are offering." "No," she said softly, "but I know what happens if I do not. There must be another way." "Was there another way when you searched for healers for 5 years?" The question silenced him. Lyra's voice gentled. "You said you would not make your strength my chain. Do not make your fear one either." Kale looked as though the words struck him deeper than a blade. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he lowered his forehead to Rowan's and closed his eyes. When he rose, the king had returned, but the man had not vanished. "Then you will not go alone." By dawn, Moonspire prepared for a war no army could see. The entrance to the lower vault lay beneath the oldest tower, behind a wall carved with the names of dead kings. Kale chose only 7 to descend. Himself, Lyra, the old seer, 2 oath-bound guards whose families had served the throne since the first reign, a northern healer named Marin, who knew the old rites, and Rowan, because the curse within him was also the key. Lyra argued against bringing the boy, but the seer insisted the vault would not open without royal blood touched by the curse. Kael nearly refused until Rowan, pale and trembling but stubborn as winter, said, "I am the heir. If the darkness is mine, I will face it." In that moment, Lyra saw Kael in him, not the fearsome wolf, but the terrible courage. Before they descended, Seraphine requested an audience. Kael denied it. Lyra should have been relieved, but something unsettled her. "Let me speak to her," she said. Kael stared. "She tried to kill you. Then she may say something useful if she thinks she can still hurt me." His eyes darkened, but he did not forbid her. Instead, he accompanied her to the prison corridor. and stood outside the cell door within striking distance. Seraphine looked different without jewels. Still beautiful, but sharpened by hatred rather than polished by ambition. Her golden hair hung loose over one shoulder, and her white gown had been replaced by a plain gray shift. When Lyra entered, Seraphine smiled slowly. The little miracle comes to gloat. I came to ask what Marius planned beneath the castle. Then ask him. He smiles too much for a defeated man. Seraphine's eyes flickered. Lyra stepped closer. You helped curse a child. You helped destroy a father. Was the crown worth that? For the first time, something like pain crossed Seraphine's face, but it vanished almost instantly. Do not speak to me of worth. You were born with blood that makes kings kneel. I was born with beauty, and a father who taught me it was only useful if powerful men desired it. The council did not ask whether I wanted Kale. They told me I would be queen or nothing. Her voice hardened. I chose queen. Lyra felt no pity strong enough to excuse her, but she felt the shape of the cage. Who placed the second curse? Seraphine looked away. Marius found the hollow crown years ago. He said Rowan's curse was only a door. If Kale refused the council after the truth surfaced, the deeper magic would wake and force the royal line into collapse. Then the council would appoint a regent. You? Seraphine laughed bitterly. No, I was never meant to rule. I was meant to bear a controllable heir. She looked back at Lyra, eyes bright with something dangerous. There is one more thing. The hollow crown does not only feed on royal blood, it offers bargains. It will show Kyle what he has lost. It will show you what you most want to heal. Do not believe mercy when it speaks with a dead voice. Lyra left the cell colder than when she entered. Kyle waited in the corridor, and though he had heard everything, he asked only, "Are you steady?" No one had ever asked her that before danger. They had asked whether she was useful, obedient, guilty, weak, never steady. She nodded, though it was not entirely true. The descent began at sunset. The old tower swallowed them in a spiral of black stone steps, each one carved before the kingdom had a written tongue. Torches burned blue as they passed. Rowan walked between Kael and Lyra, refusing to be carried, though his strength faded with every level. The air grew colder. Whispers pressed against the walls. At first, they sounded like wind. Then they became names. Kael's name, Rowan's, Lyra's mother's name, though Lyra had never spoken it aloud. Lyra Veil. The sound made her stumble. Kael caught her wrist. Do not listen. It knows her. It knows wounds, the seer said from behind them. Names are only doors. At the bottom of the stairs stood the sealed vault door. It was not made of wood or iron, but black stone veined with silver, shaped like a crown split down the center. In its center were two hollow impressions, one shaped like a wolf's paw, the other like a human hand. The seer nodded. Rowan placed his small hand against the wolf mark, and Lyra placed her bleeding palm against the other. The door drank their blood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the stone opened like an eye. The vault beyond was vast beyond reason. It should not have fit beneath the tower. A cavern stretched into darkness, its ceiling glittering with crystals like a buried night sky. At the center stood a throne made of black antlers and silver bone. Upon it rested the hollow crown. It was not large. That made it worse. It looked almost delicate. A circlet of dark metal woven with thorns, pulsing faintly as if alive. Around the throne knelt stone figures, kings, queens, wolves, children all carved in poses of worship or agony. Rowan whimpered. The crown pulsed brighter. Kael stepped in front of him. Stay behind me. The moment he spoke, a figure appeared beside the throne. A woman in a pale gown, dark hair flowing over her shoulders, face gentle and sorrowful. Kael went utterly still. Lyra knew before he said anything. Rowan's mother. The dead queen. Kyle, the apparition whispered. The Alpha King looked as though the vault had driven a blade through his heart. Amara. Rowan's eyes widened. Mother? He moved forward, but Lyra caught him. The apparition turned toward the boy, tears shining on her face. "My little moon," Rowan began to cry. Cale's hands shook at his sides. Lyra remembered Seraphine's warning. "It will show Cale what he has lost. It will show you what you most want to heal. Do not believe mercy when it speaks with a dead voice." The Queen's apparition looked at Lyra then, and her softness sharpened. "Give me the child," she said. "I can keep him safe where pain cannot reach." Kyle's breath sounded broken. Amara would never ask that. The apparition smiled sadly. "You left him in agony for 5 years." Cale flinched. "You wrapped him in guards and priests while he cried for a mother who was not there. Give him to me, and he will never suffer again." Rowan sobbed harder. The crown pulsed, feeding on grief. Lyra stepped forward despite the fear clawing up her throat. "You are not his mother." The apparition's gaze turned cold. "And you are not his blood." Lyra lifted her palm, letting starblood glow. "No. I am the one who heard him when everyone else called his pain fate." The Queen's face twisted. For an instant, the illusion rotted, revealing a hollow thing, wearing grief like skin. Cale saw it. His eyes burned silver. Enough. The apparition shattered into black birds. They screamed and hurled themselves toward the group. Kyle shifted, tearing through them. The guards raised shields. Marin chanted healing wards. Lyra pulled Rowan behind a stone figure as the birds became shards of shadow, cutting arms and faces wherever they struck. One guard fell, his eyes open and empty, whispering the name of a daughter he had lost years before. The vault was not merely attacking bodies. It was opening graves inside them. Lyra knew then that they could not fight their way to the crown like warriors storming a fortress. The hollow crown did not fear strength. It fed on it when strength was born from pain. She looked at Rowan. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but his eyes remained fixed on the throne. "It wants me," he whispered. "It thinks I am the door." Lyra cupped his face. "You are not a door. You are a child. I am a prince. You are both. But before all of that, you are alive. Hold on to that." The words sparked something in him. The silver veins beneath his skin brightened, not with curse, but with life. Lyra felt the starblood respond, not by pouring more of herself into him, but by joining with what was already his. Healing did not mean replacing weakness with her own strength. It meant helping the wounded remember the strength still theirs. "Kyle," she called. He turned from the swarm, blood on his face, wolf form rippling back into man. Lyra pointed toward the crown. "It is feeding on grief. Not blood first. Grief." Cale understood. His eyes moved to Rowan, then to the throne. "Then we starve it." The old seer smiled fiercely. "At last, a king who listens." They advanced together, not as ruler and servant, not as healer and patient, but as 3 points of one bond: father, son, and the woman whose blood had tied their survival together. The crown fought them with every wound it could summon. It showed Kyle, the battlefield, where his brother died. It showed Rowan years of lonely chambers and pain. It showed Lyra her mother fleeing through snow, then dying alone beneath a nameless tree. Lyra almost broke at that vision. Her mother looked so young, so frightened, so full of love and terror. The hollow crown whispered in her mother's voice, "Heal me, little star. You can bring me back. You can bring all of us back." Lyra stopped walking. Cale felt it through the bond. He turned, but did not command her forward. That mattered. He simply said her name. Lyra stared at the vision of her mother. All her life, she had carried an emptiness shaped like the woman who left her. Not hatred. Not exactly. A question. Why did you leave me where they would hurt me? The apparition opened its arms. "I did it to save you," it whispered. "Save me now, and I will tell you every answer." Lyra's blood surged toward the offer. Healing was her instinct. Her curse, perhaps, to see pain and move toward it, even when the pain wore a lie. Then Rowan took her hand. Small fingers. Warm. Real. "She told you to forgive her," he said softly. Lyra looked down. The boy's eyes were filled with tears, but not fear. In the memory, she said, "Forgive me, little star." Lyra closed her eyes, and the memory returned. Her mother leaving her at the border, not because she did not love her, but because love had become the only weapon she had left. The hollow crown could offer answers, but only the living could offer a future. Lyra opened her eyes. "My mother is not yours to use." The vision shattered. They reached the throne. The hollow crown rose into the air, thorns unfolding like black wings. The cavern shook. The stone figures around them cracked, and from each crack came voices begging, accusing, promising. The seer shouted that the seal must be remade with willing royal blood and willing star blood. Kael drew a dagger from his belt and cut his palm without hesitation. Lyra did the same. Rowan stepped forward, but Kael stopped him. "No." Rowan lifted his chin. "It is my curse." Kael's voice broke around the edges. "You are my son before you are my heir. And you taught me heirs protect the kingdom." Rowan looked at Lyra. "But she taught me I am alive first. So I choose. Not because the crown wants me, because I do." Kael looked at Lyra, anguish in his eyes. She could not make this easier for him. Love did not always remove the blade. Sometimes it only held the hand steady. Rowan pressed his thumb to the dagger's edge, drawing one bright bead of silver-red blood. The three of them placed their hands together beneath the crown. The hollow crown screamed. Lyra's power surged upward. But this time she did not let it pour blindly into the wound. She listened. Beneath the curse, beneath the grief, beneath generations of kings trying to bind death and councils trying to control bloodlines, there was one original wound. Fear. The first Wolf King had feared losing his children. He had feared his enemies, his mortality, the end of his name. So he had made a crown that promised survival, and created a curse that devoured everything worth surviving for. Lyra understood him, and because she understood, she refused him. "Life cannot be chained and still be life," she whispered. Kael's blood burned dark silver. Rowan's blood shone moonbright. Lyra's blood blazed like dawn beneath snow. Together, they did not destroy the crown. They unmade the oath that had given it permission to exist. The thorns cracked. The black metal turned white hot. Voices rose around them, not screaming now, but exhaling, as if centuries of trapped grief had finally been released. The crown collapsed into ash. For a moment, there was silence. Then Rowan fell. Kael caught him, and Lyra caught them both. The curse tore free from the boy's body in one final shadow, writhing like a serpent. It lunged for Lyra, seeking the blood that could remake it. But Kael stepped into its path. The shadow pierced his chest. He gasped. Lyra screamed his name. The bond between them flared with unbearable pain. She felt the curse strike his heart, felt it searching for every grief it could feed on. Amara's death, Rowan's suffering, years of solitude, the fear of loving Lyra, only to lose her too. Kael dropped to one knee. Lyra pressed both hands to his chest. "No, do not take him." The shadow hissed into her mind. A king for a prince, a life for a life. Balance must be paid. Her blood answered wildly, ready to spend everything. She could save him. She knew she could. But the cost rose before her. Her own heartbeat slowing, her own body cooling, Kael living with another grave inside him. That was the bargain the hollow crown had always understood. Love twisted into sacrifice, until nothing remained but loss wearing a noble name. Kael gripped her wrist. "Do not," he rasped. "Lyra, do not give your life for mine." Tears blurred her vision. "You would give yours." "Yes," he said with a broken smile. "That is why you must be wiser than me." Rowan, barely conscious in his father's arms, reached out and placed his small hand over theirs. "No more bargains," he whispered. The words struck like a bell. No more bargains. Lyra stopped trying to pay death with life. Instead, she called to every living pulse still in the cavern. Chael's, Rowan's, her own, the seers, the surviving guards, the roots above the stone, the wolves waiting in the courtyard, the kingdom breathing under moonlight. Healing was not a trade with death. It was an allegiance to life. Her star blood expanded, not from her body alone, but through the bond between all who chose to live without chains. The shadow screamed and dissolved. Chael collapsed forward into her arms, breathing. Rowan was breathing too. Lyra held them both as the cavern ceiling opened, not physically, but magically revealing a vision of the sky above Moonspire. Dawn had begun. Pale gold touched the buried crystals, and for the first time in centuries, the lower vault was not dark. When they emerged from the tower, the castle courtyard was filled with wolves, hundreds of them. Warriors in human form, wolves in beast form, servants, healers, children, northern scouts, old women wrapped in blankets, all waiting in silence. They saw Chael carrying Rowan and Lyra walking beside them, bloodied but alive. They saw the ash of the hollow crown staining her hands, and then Rowan lifted his head from his father's shoulder and smiled. The sound that rose from the packs was not cheering at first. It was howling, deep, reverent, overwhelming, a song of survival. Lyra felt it move through her bones. She had once believed herself wolfless, because no beast answered inside her. But standing beneath the dawn, surrounded by wolves who howled not above her but with her, she understood that belonging had never required becoming what others demanded. Her power was not lesser because it healed instead of hunted. It was not weak, because it restored instead of conquered. It had walked into death's oldest chamber and come back carrying a father and son into mourning. Lord Marius did not smile again after that. When confronted with the ash of the crown and the testimony of those who survived the vault, the remaining council abandoned him one by one. Seraphine gave a full confession, not from remorse alone, but from the bitter knowledge that those who had used her would gladly bury her beneath their crimes. Varric named every noble house that had supported the curse. The trials lasted 7 days. Chael did not turn them into spectacle. He made them record. Every crime written, every victim named, every hidden bargain dragged into light. Some were executed, some were stripped of title and exiled beyond the winter passes. Some, too frightened to resist, bent knee to the new order and lived under watchful eyes. But Lyra's greatest victory did not happen in the throne room. It happened below stairs. She returned to the servants' quarters alone one afternoon, ignoring the protests of guards who insisted she should not walk unescorted. The corridors smelled of bread, ash, wet wool, and old memories. The kitchen fell silent when she entered. Girls she had once scrubbed floors beside stared as though seeing a ghost dressed in royal black. The old cook began to kneel. Lyra crossed the room quickly and stopped her. "Please do not." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "We did not protect you." Lyra looked around at the thin faces, the scarred hands, the children carrying wood too heavy for their arms. "Most of you were trying to survive." Her voice softened, but did not weaken. "Survival is not guilt, but silence cannot be the law here anymore." By winter's end, Moonspire changed in ways no song would fully capture. Servants were granted wages, legal protection, and the right to bring accusations before a magistrate not chosen by the noble houses. Omegas could not be sold between packs as debt payment. Wolfless children were placed under royal protection, not temple shame. The old healing archives were opened, and Lyra established a sanctuary in the eastern wing where wounds of body and bloodline could be treated without rank deciding worth. Some nobles called it dangerous. Chael called it law. When one lord protested that too much mercy would weaken the kingdom, Chael looked at him across the council table and said, "Mercy broke a curse your cruelty fed for years. Choose your next words with care." Through it all, the bond between Lyra and Chael deepened with a patience neither had expected. There were no easy endings for people shaped by fear. Some nights, Kael woke from dreams of the vault with claws half-shifted and grief choking him silent. Some days, Lyra healed too many wounds and forgot that her body was not an endless vessel. They argued. He became overprotective when danger neared. She became stubborn when weakness asked her to rest. Yet each argument ended not with command, but with learning. He learned to ask instead of order. She learned that accepting care was not surrender. One evening, after Rowan had fallen asleep in wolf form across a pile of scrolls he had sworn he was studying, Kael found Lyra in the sanctuary garden. Spring had begun to touch Moonspire, fragile green pushing through thawed soil. She was kneeling beside a wounded raven, her palm glowing faintly as its broken wing mended. Kael waited until the bird flew off before speaking. "You healed 6 men today, 2 children, and a horse that bit the stablemaster immediately afterward." Lyra smiled tiredly. The horse was frightened. The horse was ungrateful. She laughed, and the sound changed his face. It always did, as if some part of him still did not believe joy could enter a room without leaving a wound behind. He sat beside her on the stone bench. For a while, they watched the last light fade behind the mountains. Then Kael took something from inside his cloak. Not a crown, not a jewel, but a small silver clasp shaped like a wolf curled around a star. "This belonged to Amara," he said. Lyra stilled. He continued carefully. "She wore it before she became queen. She once told me a crown tells others what they must see, but a small thing close to the heart tells the truth." He held it out. "I do not give it to bind you to her place. No one can ask that of you. I give it because Rowan asked what family means, and I realized I have been waiting for blood to define what love already has." Lyra's throat tightened. "Kael, if you are not ready, do not retreat before I answer." His mouth closed. She took the clasp, fingers brushing his. The bond warmed between them, steady and bright. "I spent years with no family name that protected me," she said. "Then I found a dying cub in the snow, and somehow he gave me a kingdom, a purpose, and a very difficult alpha king." Kael's lips curved. "Difficult?" "Greatly. Feared across 9 territories. And this is how I am remembered. By me, yes." His smile faded into something deeper. "I love you," he said. The words were quiet. No court, no banners, no kneeling witnesses. Just dusk, thawing earth, and a truth offered without demand. Lyra felt the old instinct to look away, to protect herself from the danger of being wanted. But the bond between them did not pull. It waited. Kael waited. She understood then that love after cruelty was not a sudden leap into trust. It was a door opened again and again, until the wounded soul believed it would not be slammed shut. She reached for his hand. "I love you too," she said, and watched the mighty Alpha King close his eyes, as if those 4 words had undone him more completely than any curse. Their mating ceremony was not held immediately. Lyra insisted the kingdom needed healing before it needed spectacle, and Kael, though clearly impatient in the silent, smoldering way only he could manage, agreed. When the day finally came, it was neither the cold political union the council had once planned, nor the grand display nobles expected. It took place in the Moon Garden, where Kael had promised not to make his strength her chain. Rowan stood between them as witness, solemn in a silver tunic, though he kept shifting on his feet with excitement. The old seer spoke the ancient vows. No crown was placed on Lyra's head. Instead, Kael and Lyra cut their palms and pressed them together, not to bind ownership, but to acknowledge choice. "Beside me," Kael said. "Beside me," Lyra answered. The mate bond flared, visible to everyone. Silver and gold braided together, wolf and star, grief and healing, power and mercy. Across the garden, wolves bowed their heads. The servants watched from the front rows, where Lyra had ordered they stand, not hidden at the back. Rowan cried openly, and denied it when anyone looked at him. Kael kissed Lyra with a tenderness that made the court vanish, and for once, no shadow rose to interrupt joy. Years later, songs would change the details. They would say Lyra was born beneath a dead moon because the stars were jealous. They would say she healed an army with one drop of blood. They would say Alpha King Cale Draven fell to his knees the moment he saw her, though the truth was harder and more beautiful. He had first failed to see her, then learned, then knelt, not because magic forced him, but because love and remorse had taught him reverence. They would say Prince Rowan was a cursed wolf cub saved by a servant girl, and that part, at least, would remain true enough. But the story Lyra cherished most was quieter. A child lost in snow. A girl with no wolf and too much heart. A dying breath answered by bleeding hands. Before courts, prophecies, crowns, and mate bonds, there had been one choice made in darkness: to protect something helpless when no reward was promised. That choice had awakened everything. And on certain winter nights, when snow fell over Moonspire and the forest turned silver beneath the moon, Lyra would stand on the balcony beside Cale, while Rowan, older, stronger, still occasionally more cub than Prince, ran with the young wolves below. Cale would wrap his cloak around her shoulders as he had done in the garden after the first bowing, and she would lean into him without fear. The kingdom beneath them was not perfect. No healed wound ever forgot entirely. But it lived. It changed. It remembered. Once, she had been called hollow because no wolf answered inside her. Now, when the packs howled under the full moon, Lyra felt no emptiness at all. She felt Rowan's laughter, Cale's steady hand, the pulse of a kingdom learning mercy, and the bright, ancient blood of women who had survived through her. She had not become powerful because a king chose her. She had become powerful when she chose to save a dying child in the snow. And the Alpha King, who had once ruled through fear, because fear was all grief had left him, ruled beside her through something far stronger. Not softness, not weakness. Love sharpened by truth. Mercy guarded by claws. A crown no longer hollow, because the woman beside it had filled the throne with life.